live button, which will then enable all those that are on live stream to join us. And when they do join us, they will be able to ask questions on the chat. Those of you who are on the questions on the chat in YouTube, if you've got a Gmail account, you'll be able to access the YouTube question chat. If, however, you're not on Gmail, it will not let you ask questions irrespective of whether you're part of the stream or not. So please bear in mind, if you've got a Gmail account and you want to ask questions, you could ask on that. However, if you're not prepared for that, please feel free to ask any questions on the chat. Mr. Nkhungulu is part of the group. He'll be able to see all your messages, and I will also check at the end of the presentation to ask your questions. So without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Nkhungulu, and thank you so much for the presentation. Over to you, sir. Mr. Nkhungulu, you are on mute. I think you put yourself back on mute, sir. Thank you. Sir, we are unable to hear you. Mr. Nkhungulu, you are not yet on the, we're unable to hear you, sir. I think he has just dropped out. So we'll wait for Mr. Nkhungulu to come back in a few seconds. Thank you. Catherine, did you have a question for me? You've come off mute. Okay, I'll just mute everybody then to avoid background noise for everybody else. Thank you. Those of you who are joining us now, we are just waiting for Mr. Nkhungulu to join us back. He was here, but he seems to have dropped off. So he'll be joining us soon.
Hello, Mrs. Kalinda. Can you hear me?
Oh, welcome back, sir. Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you very much. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd lost you because there was a time when I think there were some network problems.
Okay, sir.
Anyway, good evening, colleagues. Welcome to this presentation. My presentation will be basically in two parts. The first part will be more or less introductory, introducing ourselves to the chemicals that we use on our farms and what responsibilities as farmers have as far as pesticides are concerned. And thereafter, we'll look at the management of the store. So let's start with the first aspect. Next to slide, Mrs. Kalinda. Can we have the next slide? So there are a number of chemicals that we normally keep on our farms. And amongst these include acids, chlorine, fertilizers, as well as pesticides. These, as we can appreciate, are different types of chemicals, which, if mishandled, can cause quite a lot of problems. And so really we must store these separately. Next slide. We'll look at the types of pesticides that we normally use on our farms. Next slide, Mrs. Kalinda. Can we have the next slide?
We are on slide 4, which is showing pesticides, unless my screen is not showing it. Have you got the...
Right.
Are you able to see the
yes,
pesticide?
now, yes, now I have it. Okay, so the different types of pesticides. Yes, I can see them and I can hear you. Okay, so amongst the types of pesticides that we store or use,
Apologies, we seem to have lost Mr. Nkhungulu. Hopefully he'll find a good reception spot. And I hope it's not raining at the moment. Mr. Nkhungulu, I can see you've come on, but your audio has not been connected yet. If you can hear me, Mr. Nkhungulu, your audio was not connected. It's just showing that you can view our presentation, sir. Okay, while we wait for Mr. Nkhungulu, did anybody have any questions to do with the training sessions that you'd like me to respond to while we wait for him? You could either take yourself off mute to ask me, or you could put it in the chat. That would be no problem. Let's hope he joins us very soon. While he's still joining it, I will gladly have a look at the training sessions that are coming ahead, that you are all able to book and look forward to. So I sometimes send out an invitation, calendar invitation. Those of you who would like a calendar invitation, if you check, there will be an email from LAMCS that will go out and will appear in your calendar. So you can choose to either accept or decline. Please feel free to decline if you've got too many things in your calendar, because I do normally send out a link on the group. So if you want to just keep an eye to Thursdays, 7 p.m., there's always going to be a presentation. We are aiming this year to push our training program further. So for those of you who are not aware of the technical committee, Mr. Nkhungulu is on the technical committee and he's giving us this presentation, as well as Mr. Mutimushi and Mr. Nkhungulu, Mr. Munyoro, Ms. Olipa Lungu, Mr. Mushivwe, Mr. Isaac Mbewe, Mr. Molopa, and Mr. Kanoa are on the technical committee. These at one point in time will be able to give us presentations. We've got a various number of professions that give us presentations. Let me just have another look to see if Mr. Nkhungulu has joined us. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Chiluvi. You've asked about how do we deal with root rot, especially during the rainy season. There are a number of ways you could look at root rot. I will share on the group a technical sheet that talks about root rot. I will also share the video with regards to how you can create molds and how you can create unique molds. Our Secretary General, Mr. Chowa, is doing molds at our farm in Kawambwa, the avocado farm, for all of us who are members and shareholders. He created some videos on how he was creating them to avoid root rot, because Kawambwa is very, very water-drenched soil. So from what I understand, I'm not too sure if Mr. Chowa is on the group, but from what I understand, the manager at the Kawambwa has said that the way that he put up the molds has actually, the trees have thrived and developed. Sorry, I'm just looking, I'm a bit distracted because I'm trying to see if Mr. Nkhungulu has joined. Okay, he hasn't. So I will send a link to the last training session that we talked about mold. There was a talk on diseases for the avocado plant that included the root and the leaves, and also pesticides. And also in terms of root rot, the chemicals that you can use and those that you can't use that might actually harm your minimal residue. So there's a limit of residue that should be in your avocado for it to be consumable in other countries if you were to sell it abroad. So you have to be careful which pesticides and which insecticides that you're going to use. So I'll send out the link, and I'll also send the link to the library. We do have a library for the Lusaka Avocado members, which we will be setting up. Mr. Daka is setting up a membership section for it so that we can include it in there. For the time being, it's available in Trello. Anybody who wants access to it, just send me your email. My contacts are on the group, and I'll be able to send you the link for you to join. All you'd have to do is download Trello, which is a free resource. There's another question here. Is the use of copper sulfate and lime mixture part of organic management of avocado? Yes, there was a talk by Professor Reda. So if you look in our group, he also answers questions. If you look in the list, or if you want his contact number, do let me know and I will give you Professor Reda's details. Oh, Mr. Nkhungulu is back. Yay. Mr.
Hello,
Nkhungulu,
Mrs. Kalinde, can you hear me?
I can. And just bear in mind, sir, that there's a time delay when you ask me a question. It's not that I'm ignoring you, sir. So if you go ahead, thank you very much.
No. I must apologize.
Thank you.
I must apologize. I'm having network problems.
We understand, sir. We understand.
Okay,
Thank
so we
you.
can
Please
continue. Okay, so we just started looking at the types of pesticides that we normally stock on our farms. The most common are insecticides, which kill all kinds of insects. And then we have fungicides, which kill diseases or fungi, as it were. And the third type are herbicides, which we all know kill weeds. But we also may stock nematicides, which kill nematodes and other worms that inhabit the soil. Next slide. And then we do have acaricides, which kill mites. Mites are small insects like spiders, which sometimes produce a web on the leaves of plants and the tender shoots of plants. We may see these also on our avocado leaves and also fruits. Rodenticides kill rats and mice. And then we also have molluscicides, which kill snails and snags. Avicides kill birds. Arboricides kill forest plants. Next slide. There are also other chemicals that may be stocked on farms, such as herbicides, which kill eggs of various pests. And then plant growth regulators also amongst the chemicals that we may stock, which control the growth of plants. Defoliants, of course, defoliate plants, as well as desicants, which dry off plants. Next slide. Now let's look at the formulations of these chemicals that we're talking about. The formulations come in three different groups: liquids, powders, and granules. Now, as we know, liquids pour easily. They can easily contaminate our skin, and some produce fumes, which if inhaled, can really be quite damaging, and they're also extremely toxic if swallowed. The next group are powders, which produce dust. And again, when inhaled, can cause poisoning, and are also
Sorry, sir, you seem to have vanished after the inhalation of poisoning. I don't know if you can hear me, sir.
We can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkoko. Mr. Nkhungulu, your audio has dropped off. Oh, now your video has also dropped off. Okay, I should ask the technical committee.
sorry.
Oh, there you are. Thank you. You've come back.
My apologies. My internet seems to be
Dropping. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, the internet seems to be quite a problem in this area. It drops and comes on again.
Okay,
So I was
sir.
talking about powders that they do produce dust. Yeah, and if inhaled, can really cause poisoning, and they're also dangerous if they fall on our skin or swallowed. And the last group are granules, which are easier to work with because of they're less risky to personnel and the environment, and also can also cause poisoning through inhalation, skin, and so on. Now let's look at what we need to protect. We need to protect ourselves, our family, other people on the farm, people that buy our produce, livestock and poultry, water supplies, wildlife, as well as the environment. Next slide. As far as the responsibilities of the farmer or the storekeeper are concerned, these are some of those responsibilities. First and foremost, the farmer needs to secure the pesticide store, ensuring that all staff that enter the store wear appropriate protective clothing. They also should handle chemicals which are either brought into the storeroom or taken out of the store safely. And most importantly, they need to keep records of stock that are in the storeroom. This is also important as far as GAP compliance is concerned. And also they need to also be aware of the health and safety of all staff that enter the storeroom. Next slide. The farmer needs to train staff in general safety requirements as far as the storeroom is concerned. And also suitable storage conditions need to be maintained. The environment around the storeroom also needs to be protected. And if there are any emergencies, we need to plan for this ahead of such emergencies. And so we really need to have fire prevention facilities in place. For those that work in the storeroom, they need to protect themselves by wearing personal protective equipment as shown in the picture, which basically cover the whole body from the head all the way to the feet. And please notice how the overall is worn over the gumboots or shoes. Next slide. Go back a bit. All right. So when we are working in the storeroom, we should always remember that the more toxic a pesticide is, the more protective clothing that we need to wear. In our slide, we have 3 different colors shown there. We will come back to those colors in a moment, but each one of them basically indicates the toxicity severity of the chemicals that we're working with. Green is basically less toxic compared to yellow and red. Next slide. When we work in the storeroom, it's very important for us to understand the labels that are on our containers. And we will now, for a few minutes, look at what these labels contain. Next slide. This slide basically shows the Food and Agriculture Organization and World Health Organization pesticide classification. The classification is basically in 4 or 5 groups, starting with the most toxic in group 1 and going all the way to the least toxic in group 4. And please notice that for those that are extremely toxic, they have a skull and crossbone sign in the center of the color band. And the way these color bands are read is that on the left of the that sign, you have advisory pictures or pictograms, and on the right, you have warning pictograms. So the red ones are the ones that are extremely toxic. They are grouped in 2 groups, group 1A and group 1B. We do not need to go into details as to which ones belong to which group. Group 2 basically are those that are poisonous, but not as poisonous as the ones that are red color banded. And they do have a cross in the middle of the color band. And you also notice that in terms of the pictograms, there are less pictograms on group 2 compared to group 1. The same is the case with group 3. There are less pictograms. One need to use caution when dealing with the blue color band chemicals, as well as those that are coded green. And this slide basically shows the distinctive label markings that we've just been talking about. Next slide. This slide shows the advisory pictograms. And as we can see, basically, they highlight what we need to wear in order to protect ourselves. And the last one shows what we need to do after our using chemicals. We need to wash our hands and face, or if possible, our whole body, if those facilities are available. And the next slide shows the warning pictograms, which indicates what these chemicals can affect. Next slide. Please remember the following. When we are dealing with chemicals, always wear clean protective clothing. Handle pesticides carefully. After using chemicals, please wash yourself. Wash your protective clothing so that the next time you use the PPEs, they will be clean. And also, please follow label instructions carefully, because if they're not followed carefully, mistakes may be made, which can lead to unfortunate situations. And after we work, we need to wash our hands before we eat, drink, or do anything else. Let's now come to the setting of the storeroom. The first aspect is to see how far we need to site the storeroom from water sources. If we have a borehole or a well on our farm, we need to at least have 250 meters from such sources. If it's ponds or rivers, we should have at least 500 meters from those sources. We should also keep our storeroom away from domestic dwellings, from eating areas or shops, as well as the community services areas such as clinics, schools, markets, or churches. We also need to locate our storeroom away from where we store our food or grain, as well as from fertilizers. If we do not have enough space or storage facilities, we need to separate fertilizers from chemicals, as we shall see in a moment. And we also need to store our chemicals away from fuels and other combustible materials. Next slide. Our storerooms should be vermin-proof. They should also have warning signs, such as the ones that we're going to see on our slide in a moment. We should also have war charts and posters, which can give guidance should there be a problem in the storeroom. And we should also keep our storerooms tidy and clean. Another area that we need also to manage is security. It's important that our storerooms are secure from entry by unauthorized personnel and animals. And as such, we need to fence off our store. We also need to make sure that the keys to the storeroom are properly controlled. In other words, only authorized personnel should have access to these keys, and they should be stored in a secure area. The next slide. When storing our chemicals, we need to make sure that they are off or above the floor, whether they're shelves or pallets. We need to make sure that our chemicals are stored above the floor so that there is adequate airflow. And we also need to store them away from the walls so that there's adequate access to the chemicals. Next slide. Another area that we need to also to be aware of is the fact that when we are storing chemicals, we should do so away from foodstuffs, animal feed, or other materials such as clothing, tobacco, cosmetics, and so on. Chemicals should also be stored in a storeroom that is convenient, that has convenient access, so that we will be able to, if we can go back to the previous slide. Okay, yes, we need to store them in a storeroom that is accessible for self-delivery and collection, with also a reasonable working area. And also ensure that as we stock our pesticides, they are stocked correctly. They should not be above shoulder height. Next slide. As we saw earlier on, chemicals can be classified into liquids, dust and granules, powders and granules. These need to be kept separately. Next slide. Another thing that we also need to do is to carry out checks regularly in order for us to make sure that the chemicals we are using are not only all right, but also not having deteriorated. So we need to check if there are any unnecessary stocks. In other words, are there any chemicals that we've had for a long time? Those ones need to be disposed of. We also need to check for legality of the products. There are, for instance, some chemicals that we cannot use on certain crops, especially those that are meant for export. So we really need to be careful as to which chemicals we buy because of that fact. And also we need to observe the first in, first out principle. In other words, the chemicals that come into the storeroom first should be the ones that should go out first. And then we need also to keep records, and this should be up to date and complete. This is one area that I personally have found challenges, but I'm working on. It's important because if we are going to be GAP compliant, records are a must. And if there are any containers that have deteriorated, for instance, there may be some containers containing liquids which have rusted if they're in metal containers, such ones need to be disposed of. If the products have deteriorated, again, the same thing should be done. We need to dispose such. Next slide. Let's ensure that we assist in keeping records up to date. Sometimes we may delegate this task or responsibility to maybe one of our children if we do not have that many workers, or perhaps a supervisor or a capital, but let's make sure that we keep track of the records so that they're up to date. Next slide. Let's now come to issues of problems in the storeroom. Whenever we handle chemicals, there are always leaks and spills. We need to make sure that we have equipment that can help us handle such spills. And amongst the equipment that we need to have are buckets. One bucket should have sawdust mixed with lime. Another one with dry sand. You should have a spade, broom, pan, clean labeled buckets, cloths for cleaning surfaces and containers, as well as a mop to clean the floors. Next slide. The procedure that we need to carry out when cleaning a leak or a spill is that first we need to wear protective clothing. After wearing our protective clothing, especially the gloves, we need to upright the container so that we stop the leak. And then the area that has been affected needs to be contained by soaking the spill with sawdust and lime mix or the dry sand. Thereafter, we need to brush up the chemical carefully and place the sweepings in a bucket. And let's make sure that the sweepings that we have swept off the floor are kept for proper disposal. We also need to make sure that we clean ourselves and our protective clothing after handling such an emergency. Next slide. This is just a pictorial presentation of the procedure of cleaning a leak. First and foremost, we need to make sure that animals and people are kept away from the leak. And thereafter, as we can see in the first picture, we contain the area by applying sand or the sawdust lime mixture. After that, we need to brush carefully the area and then put the sweepings in a labeled bucket for later disposal. Next slide. The spillage needs to be reported to you as a farm manager or the owner of the farm, as well as recorded in a book. And the information that needs to be recorded should include the date, time, the name of the pesticide, formulation, and so on. And the stock records need to be altered to indicate the amount of lost chemical during this spillage. Next slide. Sometimes, due to some unforeseen circumstances, we may end up with a fire in our storeroom. In order for us to minimize such an emergency, we should make sure that no smoking is done in the storeroom. Let's make sure that all the electric fittings are safe. We should also minimize the dust in the storeroom, and the chemicals should be stored and stacked properly, and have separate stores, as we indicated earlier on, for things like fertilizers. And then the workers need to be properly supervised so that we do not have such emergencies. We also need to have numbers for the fire fighting department, because there may be cases where the fire may be too big for us to control. And how do we control a fire? Well, we need to have, of course, fire extinguishers on site. And we also need to have several types, because different extinguishers are meant for different types of fires. We also need to have water, sand, banding, as well as training our workers on how to fight such a fire. Banding basically means putting a barrier between the area that we are storing chemicals and the outside. And we should also have in writing an emergency action. Next slide. Thank you very much for your attention. This has been really brief. The material should have been much, much more than, but considering our time, I hope that this gives us an idea of the principles in managing a storeroom. Thank you very much, and I would like to welcome your questions now.
Thank you so much. I'll start off with my questions. You know, when you showed the table that shows the red, amber, and green in terms of toxicity, is that an international thing with the skulls and all that, or do we have to sort of bear in mind that different organizations have different labeling? Thank you, sir.
No, those basically are the FAO and World Health Organization labels, which are international. The unfortunate part is that there are certain chemical companies which do not display those color bands. Now, I know that the Zambia Environmental Management Agency is working on this because I would like to have all chemicals being sold in Zambia to have the color bands and classified according to the Food and Agriculture Organization and World Health Organization. Thank you.
Thank you. And then in terms of charts, you mentioned we should have charts. Are these specifically bought with pesticides, or do you mean we just need to purchase and find some charts that describe things for our workers and for our farms?
I'm not very sure if we can find charts locally, but there are some that can be bought internationally or on the international market. However, the information that normally is on the charts is also found on the pesticide labels that are on our containers. And one can more or less simplify the information on the labels by either writing it on a larger poster for the benefit of our workers, or having some of those labels removed and put in a file so that they can be easily read by anyone who would like to refer to them.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Nkhungulu also mentioned GAP a couple of times. Mr. Nkhungulu, being on the technical committee, has been putting together with the committee GAP charts and GAP manuals for the members. So the members will have access to GAP certification when you're ready. Also, we have got a talk or training session on GAP, which will go into more detail. As Mr. Nkhungulu said, this is a big topic, so we'll be able to cover that. Mr. Nkhungulu, I wanted to ask you about the sawdust. How do you dispose of the sawdust after you have, if it's absorbing toxics? Do you burn it, or do you, I'm sure we can't bury it. I don't know. How do we dispose of it?
That's something that has been a challenge in Zambia. In some countries, they have incinerators where such material can be taken for incineration. In Zambia, so far, what has been happening is that farmers have identified a location which is far from the homestead and water sources, where they dig a hole and decant all this material and bury it. That in itself is not, of course, something that is advisable, because eventually those chemicals will end up in the underground water sources. Right now, ZEMA is looking into this, and hopefully they'll come up with a solution to this problem. The closest that we have to incineration is the cement factories, where the temperatures there are high enough to completely dispose of the chemicals. But as for now, we do not have any. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, we are listening, sir.
Oh, all right. Okay. I seem to have seen a completely different screen on my tablet. So as of now, we really do not have a safe way of disposing these chemicals.
Thank you. Yes, because your presentation stopped, sir. So my apologies. That was me. The other questions will come from from Zoom.
No problem.
And I invite the members who want to ask Ms. Nkhungulu their questions. Those of you who want me to read out those in the chat, I can do, but if you take yourself off mute, and then please kindly ask your question. Mrs. Chewa, you've got a question? I think Mrs. Chewa has asked, what is the difference between mice and rats?
Good question. I'm an Easterner, so I'm sure I can describe it the Eastern way. Mice usually are found mainly in the field, and hence being our delicacy. And rats usually are found in the buildings. I think that's the simplest way that I can put it. There may be a scientific definition of what a mice or rat is, but in my understanding, I think that's what it is. Mice are in the field, and rats usually are found in buildings.
I see. Just to ask, mice and rats, apart from obviously damaging the avocados that we harvest, are they harmful to our trees? Mr. Nkhungulu?
Well, I didn't catch the last part of your question. I didn't catch the last part of the question. Are they harmful?
I was wondering if rats or mice are harmful to our avocado trees in the nursery or in the field.
In the nursery, I do not think so. I've not heard of any rats or mice that have attacked small seedlings. But in the field, on the trees, I've personally seen damage to ripe fruit.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Nkoma, do you want to ask your question, ma'am? If you take yourself off mute. Okay, no problem if it's... Okay, I'll ask a question. What's the correct way of disposing of expired pesticides?
Just like with your question, Mrs. Kalinda, right now we do not have the correct way of disposing of expired pesticides. Ideally, we should have had the facilities where such chemicals could be incinerated. And as I said, Zambia Environmental Management Agency are looking into this to see if perhaps we could have a system where such chemicals could be collected, stored in a safe location, either for export to be incinerated outside the country where such facilities are available, or should we have one set up in the country where such chemicals could be disposed of? As of now, unfortunately, we do not have any.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Looking at your questions, everybody. Oh, yes, there's one from Ms. Lesher. Do you want to ask your question? so that we can have not just me talking, if that's okay. I hope, Chilesha, are you able to come off? Okay, maybe she's not able to come on. So her question is the fire department quick to respond to fire emergencies? Would you know, Mr. Nkhungulu?
I think I'll just give a guess here, thinking off the top of my head. From what I know, I think we are, for now, having the fire services which are very, very inadequate, not only for the city, but helping out on farms. So in my opinion, I don't think we do have adequate facilities from the fire department. We just hope that one day we may have such. But for now, all that I could advise is that on each farm, we should have the fire extinguishers. And we have a number of fire services companies which we could contact and seek advice as to what type of fire extinguishers or fire equipment we could have on our farms. That might help us. Otherwise, if we're to depend on the fire services department, we may probably not have them in time.
Yes, that's very true. In my area in Lusaka West, we actually always have a little bit of forest fire starting here and there, depending on where it is. And what we have found that has been useful for us in terms of fire is having allocated water specifically for firefighting at various points on the farm. The other thing we did is make sure we had the 10-meter around the whole farm. I've forgotten what they call it, where it's like a road, but it's not a road. It's like a fire break, so to speak. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's the one. So we have a 10-meter fire break. It's recommended you can have 5. We chose 10 because our area is very, very grassy and our neighbors haven't kept their grass down. I have to say, because of that 10-meter, when we had a fire, our workers were very quick to act. We had river sand. Fortunately, that was very strategically placed. It wasn't deliberate, it was accidental. That also helped those that were fighting the fire. So it depends if you catch it early and if you enable the workers, the farm workers, to have access to this, they should be able to turn it out. So they sent us a quick video showing us what was happening, and we were very impressed that they were able to access it based on the fact that we had water. The other way we did was we have taps along certain areas so that either the pipe can go to the left or to the right to have to fight fire. Those who have got the funds are able to buy. It's something that you put in the back of your truck. It's like a gun that looks like what the fire department do. But I've seen colleagues who are in New Kasama have that. So they just put it in the back of their truck and they go and they spray. They've got a group that actually behaves the way you would with I've forgotten what it's called, where you have people who are not police, neighborhood watch. Yes, just like neighborhood watch, they've got fire watch. So whoever is on watch and they send a message to say there's a fire, or the whole neighborhood goes over and they put the fire out. So the last thing I want to say about fire is, as a cooperative, we have been giving talks on insurance. Please insure your investments. There is a form on a Padlet board. I don't know if any of you would have seen a little green symbol that I've been sending out for Padlet. That Padlet form will show you all the insurance forms that are there. And if you look at the training sessions, they will be coming soon, more training sessions regarding insurance packages. That is all we have among the questions. I can see there are no more questions in the group. I would like to thank Mr. Nkhungulu so much for your time. Sir, do you have any lasting comments that you'd like to share with our members?
Well, I would like to thank the members who have attended our training. I just hope that in future we'd have more and more of our colleagues attending, because personally I've found these trainings very helpful and educative. So I would like to thank all that have participated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, but I will be ending the training session in 2 minutes, but I will wait just in case somebody has got a question. Mr.
Yes, good
Nkhungulu?
evening. You wanted to ask something?
Oh, yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, the question in the chat where I was asking about, I planted some avocado plants recently, and then I was advised that you needed to paint them with some paint. And then
yes, sorry, I've just
so
question.
yeah, so the challenge I have is which paint is better. Is it PVA, as others are advising water paint? But when I went into a shop, I was told even PVA is water paint. So I don't know which water paint is there. And some nurseries actually they use PVA to paint, like the northern nurseries,
Mr. Nkhungulu,
which is
would you
near
like?
Fuinjira somewhere there. Yeah. So I don't know which advice would you give a paint.
No problem. Mr. Nkhungulu, would you like to answer that, sir?
Yes, I think a few months back, Professor Reda gave us what we need to use to paint our trunks. I just can't recall off the top of my head what it was, but I think it included a fungicide, some lime, salt, or something to that effect. Personally, I would be hesitant to use paint because some paints contain lead, and lead is poisonous to the plants. So unless if you check and see that the paint you're using does not contain lead, I would be very careful and very cautious to use paint. But on our group, I'm sure somewhere we do have that suggestion from Professor Reda.
Yes, sir. I've just found it. It says 1 kg copper sulfate, 1 kg lime, 100 liters of water. And I remember giving my workers this to paint our trees. Initially, when you paint it, it doesn't show, but then it ends up looking white. And that's probably why people mixing it with paint, but it comes up as a white mixture. But Professor Rada is on the group. And if you want me to pass you his details, let me know, or just send him a message on the group. He normally answers. Does that answer your question, Mr. Mukaba? Okay, I think he's on mute.
Oh, I'm saying thank you very much.
Okay.
If you can send it to me, I missed that training probably.
No problem, sir. No problem. Professor Rada is on the schedule to talk again. If you want to join his conversation, even though his training sessions are on specific topics, he normally answers all the questions that come, even if it's not about the topic he's presenting. So I found this very useful. Thank you so much for your question. I appreciate it, Mr. Mukaba. Thank you. Was there anybody else who had a question? I see. Is the copper sulfate and lime mixture part of organic management of avocados? Mr. Nkhungulu?
Yes, it is. I mean, copper sulfate is basically an organic material, and lime also, as we know, is just also organic in nature. So it's just part of the organics that we are encouraging.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to read through. That was Esther. Thank you, Esther, for your question. And then she says, and then who's this? How do we deal with fruit rot, especially during rainy season? I answered that partially, but you might have a better answer, Mr. Nkhungulu.
No, I think your answer was adequate. Perhaps you can just repeat it just in case it was missed.
Like that. Okay, I just talked about planting in molds where it is waterlogged, and also about looking at specific antifungals, and to be careful in terms of the chemicals that you use. I can see somebody here has says, as we go along, can the chemicals known to be detrimental to the EU market be highlighted? So on the actual library Trello that I was talking about, there is a link there that goes to what is called access to markets. It's an EU portal. Anybody can access it. If you just go into Google and say EU database, minimum residue levels, it comes up as accessible. You click on it and it opens it. If you can't find it, please send me a direct message and I will share that on with everybody. That is not a problem. The other thing I was going to share was those of you who might... Yes, sir, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something to what you've just said. Generally speaking, the less poisonous chemicals, the ones that have a blue and green color band, are usually the chemicals recommended for use on export crops. But I think you can get more details from what Mrs. Kalenda has just told us. Thank you.
Actually, I didn't know that. Thank you very much. I'm going to look through all my labels now. Thank you. Okay. I appreciate that. Normally, I just ask either at livestock for the technical services, or I ask at Farmers Ban. They also sometimes give assistance. Was there any other message? If you've got a message we haven't answered, please come off. Oh, Mr. Mukuka, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, good evening, and thank you very much, Mr. Nkhungulu, for the excellent presentation. My question is, the use of weed killers, is it a good, sustainable farming practice?
No, it's not sustainable. And if we are going organic, it's something that we may need to discourage our members from doing. Ideally, weeds that are in our fields can actually be taken advantage of as mulch. So if we're able to control our weeds by hoeing them, and then when they're dry, piling them around our trees, that would be a benefit to our trees, because once they rot, all the nutrients that were in those weeds will go to our trees. Herbicides generally are not recommended in organic farming. And of course, there's this issue of some of these herbicides potentially being carcinogenic or cancer causing, which is something that we should be aware of and try as much as possible not to apply on our fields, especially since those that apply our chemicals may not be that educated concerning the poisonous nature of these chemicals. Some of them may be spraying without any protective equipment to their detriment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question on that one as well?
Yes, please.
Yeah, now if the use of most of these chemicals,
Go ahead.
The general public may not be, yeah, if the use of not, everybody doesn't know much about them, shouldn't the environmental department sort of allow only the ones that are user-friendly than
Sorry, you are breaking.
stuff like that?
If I got your question, shouldn't the authorities perhaps limit the chemicals we are using to those that are less poisonous. Is that the question? Mr. Mkuka, can you repeat your question?
Yes, generally it's yeah. Shouldn't the authorities limit some of these chemicals that we use on our farms? Because we may not have the knowledge to know which ones would cause us harm.
That's a very difficult question to answer, Mr. Mkuka. I think Zambia Environmental Management Agency are trying to put in place mechanisms to try and help us generally as far as some of these chemicals are concerned. Because one thing for certain, all chemicals are poisons, and poisons kill. So whether they are green labeled or red labeled, one just needs to take necessary caution. So in terms of whether, we should just restrict the importation, since we do not manufacture any in the country, whether we should restrict the importation of chemicals to those that are less poisonous. I think that's something that Zambia Environmental Management Agency may be able to answer correctly. I do not have an answer to that.
Okay, no, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
I'm sure they, like you said, Mr. Nkhungulu, they might be able to give recommendations when asked, but like most agencies, I think the fact that we are so widespread and farmers are normally remote and contacting everyone is not easy. So probably the best thing is contacting them. Sorry, my apologies. But thank you so much, Mr. Nkhungulu. Mr. Mukuka, did you have a follow-up question or was that okay? There seems to be a delay. Okay, I think unless anybody else has anything, if you want to come off, I think, thank you so much.
I posted a question in the chat, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
I wanted to find out which herbicide is good for spraying before planting that will not affect plant growth afterwards.
To be honest, I honestly don't know. We have so many herbicides now on the market, and many of them usually are targeted against weeds in field crops, such as maize or soybeans. I would advise that you visit either farmers' barn or livestock where they have experts in chemicals who could advise you depending on the crop that you have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Mushiba had given a talk on that as well, on organic fertilizers and non-organic and the difference, and he went into details about herbicides. I don't know if you attended that, but if you wanted the link for his presentation or his PowerPoint, do contact any of us on the technical committee. We'll be able to send it to you, no problem. Was there any other follow up with that? Oh, okay, you've put a note in the system, the message. Thank you. Was anybody else going to ask a question, or are you all okay for me to sign off now? Let me have a look. Yes, there are no more questions in the chat. Thank you, Mr. Nkhungulu, for your time, and thank you so much for sticking through the difficult connection. And thank you, everybody, for joining. We appreciate your joining and your joining the trainees and supporting it. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Goodbye, Mr. Nkhungulu. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. You're welcome. Thank you.